The relentless Arizona sun beat down on Nora Nelson's sweat-soaked dress as she pushed against the wagon wheel with all her might, her slender arms trembling from exhaustion. It was June 1879, and this godforsaken stretch of desert between Tucson and Tombstone seemed determined to be her final resting place. "Come on," she pleaded, her voice cracking as she pushed against the splintered wooden wheel, watching it sink deeper into the thick red mud. The freak summer storm had passed quickly, but left behind a treacherous patch of earth that had swallowed her wagon wheels nearly to the axles. Nora wiped her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of mud across her forehead. At 23, she had believed herself strong enough to make this journey alone, despite the warnings from everyone back in St. Louis. But 3 weeks on the trail had taught her more about hardship than her previous years combined. Her 2 horses nickered nervously, sensing her distress. The supplies she'd carefully packed enough to start her new life teaching at Tombstone's newly established school were dwindling. She had maybe 3 days of water left, and being stranded in the desert with no help in sight was not how she had envisioned her grand adventure west. "Looks like you could use a hand, madam." The deep voice startled her so badly she nearly fell face first into the mud. Whirling around, Nora found herself staring up at a man on horseback, silhouetted against the punishing sun. She squinted, trying to make out his features as he dismounted with fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. As he stepped closer, she could see he was tall and broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind. His clothes were trail-worn but serviceable dusty denims, a faded blue shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better days. A gun belt hung low on his hips, but something about his easy smile made her fear subside slightly. "I don't mean to frighten you," he said, removing his hat to reveal thick dark hair. "Name's Jacob Mercer. Most folks call me Jake." Nora straightened her spine, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance. "Nora Nelson. I'm headed to Tombstone to take up a teaching position." His eyes, a startling blue against his tanned skin, widened slightly. "Tombstone? Alone?" He glanced at her wagon, then back at her with newfound respect. "That's mighty brave of you, Miss Nelson." "Or foolish," she replied with a rueful smile, gesturing toward her predicament. Jake assessed the situation with a practiced eye. "Nothing foolish about getting caught in bad luck. Happens to the best of us." He tied his horse to her wagon and rolled up his sleeves, revealing sun-bronzed forearms corded with muscle. "Let's see what we're dealing with here." For the next hour, Jake worked methodically, using a complex system of ropes and leverage that Nora couldn't quite follow. He dug around the wheels, positioned boards for traction, and spoke soothingly to her horses as he guided them to pull at just the right moment. Nora wasn't accustomed to standing idle while someone else worked. "Please tell me how I can help," she insisted. He glanced up at her, surprise evident on his face. "Most ladies I've met would be sitting in the shade." "I'm not most ladies, Mr. Mercer." A slow smile spread across his face. "No, I don't believe you are." He handed her a rope. "When I give the signal, pull as hard as you can." Working together, with sweat pouring down their faces and mud coating their clothes, they finally felt the wagon lurch forward, the wheels breaking free with a great sucking sound. The horses strained against their harnesses, and suddenly they were on solid ground again. Nora laughed with relief, the sound pure and joyful in the vast desert silence. Jake found himself captivated by the transformation of her face, the way her green eyes sparkled, and the small dimple that appeared in her left cheek. "I can't thank you enough," she said, attempting to brush the mud from her skirts. "No need for thanks," Jake replied, wiping his hands on a bandana. "Couldn't leave you stranded out here." He looked at the position of the sun. "It'll be dark soon. There's a small stream about a mile ahead. Would make a good camp for the night." Nora hesitated, weighing propriety against practicality. She'd been raised to believe that a lady never traveled alone with a gentleman who wasn't family. But she'd also been raised to use her common sense, and dying of thirst in the desert because of social niceties seemed the greater folly. "That would be much appreciated," she finally said. "I'm afraid my water supplies are running low." Jake nodded, as if he'd expected no other answer. As he helped her back onto the wagon seat, he said something that would stay with her long after. "You'll never struggle alone again, not if I can help it." He said it so matter-of-factly, not as a grand declaration but as a simple truth, that Nora found herself believing him despite all logic. They made camp near the stream as the sun set, painting the desert in vibrant oranges and purples. Jake insisted on handling the horses and setting up a small fire while Nora prepared a simple meal from her supplies, supplemented by jerky from Jake's saddlebags. As they ate, Nora studied him in the firelight. "What brings you to these parts, Mr. Mercer?" "Jake," he corrected gently. "I'm heading to Tombstone myself. Got word of work at a ranch outside town." He took a sip from his tin cup. "Been riding with cattle drives for years, but figured it might be time to stay in one place for a spell." "And is there a Mrs. Mercer waiting somewhere for you to settle down?" Nora asked, then immediately flushed at her boldness. Jake's expression softened.
"No, madam."
Never found the right woman willing to put up with a wandering cowboy. He stared into the fire. "My folks had a small place in Texas. After they passed, there wasn't much keeping me there." "I'm sorry," Nora said quietly. He shrugged. "Life out here is hard. You learn to keep moving forward." He turned the conversation to her. "What about you? What brings a fine lady like yourself out to Tombstone of all places?" Nora wrapped her hands around her cup, drawing comfort from its warmth. "I was teaching in St. Louis, but after my parents died of influenza last winter, there was nothing left for me there either." She gazed up at the stars, impossibly bright in the desert sky. "The school board in Tombstone offered twice the salary I was making. They're desperate for educated women willing to brave the territory." "Tombstone's growing fast with the silver strikes, but it's still rough country," Jake warned. "Not exactly what a lady like you might be used to." "I'm tougher than I look," Nora replied with a hint of defiance. "And I've always wanted adventure. To see something beyond drawing rooms and church socials." Jake laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Well, you'll certainly find that in Tombstone." As the fire burned low, Jake insisted Nora sleep in her wagon while he made his bedroll on the ground nearby. "I'll keep watch," he assured her. "No need to worry." Despite her exhaustion, Nora found sleep elusive. Through the canvas cover of her wagon, she could see Jake's silhouette against the starlit sky. There was something comforting about his presence, a steady reliability that made her feel safer than she had in months. The next morning dawned clear and hot. They broke camp efficiently, working together as if they'd done so for years rather than a single day. Jake rode alongside her wagon as they continued toward Tombstone, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his travels that made Nora laugh until tears came to her eyes. By midday, the landscape began to change, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills dotted with scrubby trees. They stopped to rest the horses in the shade of a large cottonwood beside a small, trickling creek. "We should reach Tombstone by tomorrow afternoon," Jake said, helping Nora down from the wagon. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and she felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the Arizona heat. "I don't know how to thank you for your help," Nora said, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "Seeing you safely to town is thanks enough," Jake replied, his voice lower than before. He stepped back, clearing his throat. "Though I wouldn't say no to a home-cooked meal once you're settled." Nora smiled. "I think that could be arranged." They were just preparing to continue their journey when Jake's head snapped up, his hand moving instinctively to his gun. "Get behind the wagon," he ordered, his voice suddenly hard. "What is it?" Nora whispered, heart pounding as she obeyed. "Riders coming fast." Could be nothing, but out here, that usually means trouble. Within moments, 3 men on horseback thundered into view, pulling up sharply when they spotted Jake and Nora's camp. The man in front was heavy-set with a bushy beard and cold eyes that assessed the wagon and its contents with undisguised interest. "Well, what do we have here?" he drawled, spitting a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. "Looks like we found ourselves some travelers' boys." Jake positioned himself between the men and Nora, his stance casual, but his eyes alert. "Afternoon, gentlemen. Just passing through on our way to Tombstone." The leader's gaze fixed on Nora, who fought the urge to shrink back. "Pretty little thing you got there, teacher, by the looks of those books." He nodded toward the crate of schoolbooks visible in the wagon. "My wife and I would appreciate being left to our journey," Jake said smoothly, the lie rolling off his tongue with convincing ease. Nora's eyes widened, but she quickly schooled her features, stepping forward to stand beside Jake. She slipped her hand into his, feeling his momentary surprise before his fingers closed firmly around hers. The leader seemed to weigh his options, looking from Jake's steady hand near his gun to the determined set of Nora's jaw. After a tense silence, he spat again and nudged his horse backward. "Tombstone's getting too crowded these days," he muttered. "Come on, boys." They watched in silence as the men rode away, and only when they were specks on the horizon did Jake release Nora's hand. "I apologize for the deception," he said, a flush creeping up his neck. "Out here, a lone woman is too tempting a target for some men." "I thought it best to." "You did what was necessary," Nora interrupted, her heart still racing. "Thank you." They resumed their journey in thoughtful silence, both acutely aware of the brief intimacy they had shared. By nightfall, they made camp in a sheltered hollow, the distant lights of a small settlement visible on the horizon. "That's Charleston," Jake explained as he built the fire. "Mining town that serves the Tombstone mills. We'll skirt around it tomorrow." After their evening meal, Jake surprised Nora by pulling a battered harmonica from his saddlebag. "Do you mind?" he asked, suddenly shy. "Music helps me unwind after a long day." "Please," Nora encouraged him, settling back against her saddle. The haunting melody that drifted from the harmonica seemed to capture all the loneliness and beauty of the desert around them. Nora found herself mesmerized not just by the music, but by the transformation in Jake's face as he played, the way the hard lines softened, the way his eyes closed in concentration. When the last note faded into the night, Nora realized she had tears in her eyes. "That was beautiful," she said softly. "What's it called?" "Don't rightly know," Jake admitted with a small smile. "Just something I made up along the way." "You created that?" Nora was genuinely impressed. "You're quite talented, Jake Mercer." He ducked his head, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. "My ma taught me to play. Said music was good company on lonely nights." He tucked the harmonica away. "What about you? Any hidden talents, Miss Nelson?" Nora laughed.
I'm afraid I'm dreadfully practical.
"I can sew a straight seam, balance accounts to the penny, and recite the capitals of all 38 states and 8 territories." Not exactly the stuff of campfire entertainment. "I don't know," Jake replied, his eyes twinkling. "I'd be mighty impressed to hear all those capitals." They talked late into the night, sharing stories of their childhoods and dreams for the future. Nora described the school she hoped to build in Tombstone, while Jake spoke of saving enough to buy a small ranch someday. "You know," Nora said thoughtfully, gazing into the fire, "when I decided to come west, everyone told me I was being foolish, that a woman alone wouldn't last a month in the territories." "And what did you tell them?" "That I'd rather fail at something meaningful than succeed at something that made me miserable." She looked up to find Jake watching her with an expression that made her breath catch.
What?
"Just thinking I've never met anyone quite like you, Nora Nelson." The way he said her name like it was something precious sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the night air. The following day brought them within sight of Tombstone. The town rose from the desert like a mirage, its buildings stark against the landscape. As they approached, Jake pointed out landmarks, the mines that had sprung up after the Silver Strike, the bustling main street, the new courthouse under construction. "It's growing faster than anyone expected," he explained. 2 years ago, there was hardly anything here. Now look at it. Nora felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension as they drew closer. This dusty town would be her home now, these strangers her neighbors, and the parents of her future students. They stopped at the edge of town, both suddenly reluctant to end their journey. "The school board arranged lodging for me with a widow named Mrs. Henderson on 5th Street, Nora said, breaking the awkward silence. "I should find her house before it gets dark." Jake nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'll escort you there. Make sure you're settled properly." Mrs. Henderson proved to be a kind-faced woman in her 60s who welcomed Nora warmly and eyed Jake with undisguised curiosity. "And who might this gentleman be?" she asked after introductions were made. "Mr. Mercer rescued me when my wagon became stuck in the mud outside Tucson," Nora explained. "He was kind enough to escort me the rest of the way." "How fortunate," Mrs. Henderson remarked with a knowing smile that made Nora blush. "Perhaps Mr. Mercer would join us for supper? I've made more than enough stew." Jake removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "That's mighty kind of you, madam, but I should find the Triple R Ranch and report to my new employer. Been on the trail too long already." Nora felt a pang of disappointment. "Will I see you again?" she asked, then immediately wished she could take back the 2 eager words. But Jake's face brightened. "I'll be in town Saturday for supplies. Perhaps I could call on you then? If that's acceptable." "I would like that very much," Nora replied, ignoring Mrs. Henderson's poorly concealed smile. After Jake had gone, with promises to return in 3 days' time, Mrs. Henderson showed Nora to a small but comfortable room at the back of the house. "He seems like a fine young man," the older woman commented as she helped Nora unpack her trunk. "I've only known him 2 days," Nora protested weakly. Mrs. Henderson patted her hand. "My dear, I knew my Harold for exactly 3 hours before I agreed to marry him. When it's right, time doesn't signify." Over the next 2 days, Nora threw herself into preparations for the new school term. She met with the school board, 5 stern-faced men who seemed both relieved she had arrived safely and mildly scandalized by her youth and attractiveness. The schoolhouse was smaller than she'd expected but clean and well-built, with new desks and a small library of donated books. By Saturday morning, Nora found herself checking the clock with embarrassing frequency. Mrs. Henderson pretended not to notice, but her knowing smiles spoke volumes. Jake arrived promptly at noon, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt, his hair still damp from washing. He presented Nora with a small bouquet of wildflowers, their vibrant purples and yellows a stark contrast to the desert browns. "They grow near the creek by the ranch," he explained, looking almost shy. "Reminded me of you somehow, thriving where most wouldn't dare try." Mrs. Henderson insisted they use her parlor for their visit, though she discreetly retired to her bedroom with a book, leaving the door slightly ajar in a nod to propriety. Jake told Nora about the Triple R Ranch, a growing operation run by a fair-minded rancher named Robert Russell. "He's offered me a position as foreman if I prove myself over the next few months," Jake explained, excitement evident in his voice. "It's good work, steady pay." "That sounds wonderful," Nora said sincerely. "Do you like it there?" "It's the first place in a long while that feels like it could be home," Jake admitted. "Especially now that," he stopped abruptly, color rising in his cheeks. "Now that what?" Nora prompted gently. Jake met her eyes directly. "Now that I have a reason to stay in one place." The implication hung between them, too new and fragile to be acknowledged directly, but too powerful to be ignored. In the weeks that followed, Jake called on Nora every Saturday without fail. They established a routine lunch at the hotel restaurant, followed by a walk through town, sometimes a visit to the mercantile, where Nora would help Jake select books he was using to improve his reading. As September approached, bringing with it the start of the school term, Nora found herself increasingly anxious about balancing her teaching duties with her growing feelings for Jake. The school board had made it clear that while they were desperate enough for a teacher to hire an unmarried woman, they expected impeccable behavior. "Teachers must be above reproach, Mr. Holbrook," the board president had warned her. "The children look to you as an example of moral virtue." These concerns weighed heavily on Nora's mind as she and Jake walked along the edge of town one evening in late August. The sunset painted the desert in spectacular colors, but Nora barely noticed, lost in her thoughts. "Something's troubling you," Jake observed, stopping to face her. "Have I done something wrong?"
No.
"Not at all," Nora hastened to assure him. "It's just, the school term starts next week, and the board has certain expectations about my conduct." Understanding dawned in Jake's eyes. "They're worried about you spending time with me. They haven't said anything specifically," Nora clarified. "But they've made it clear that as the town's only teacher, I'll be watched closely." Jake was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Nora, these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. I know we haven't known each other long, but I'm certain of what I feel." His blue eyes were earnest as they met hers. "I don't want to complicate your position here, but I can't pretend I don't care for you deeply." Nora's heart raced. "I care for you too, Jake. More than I thought possible in such a short time." "Then may I have permission to speak to the school board? To make my intentions clear and honorable?" Nora blinked in surprise. "What exactly would you tell them?" Jake's smile was tender as he brought her hand to his lips. "That I intend to court you properly, with marriage in mind, if you'll have me." Joy bubbled up inside Nora, unexpected and overwhelming. "Are you sure? Your life has been so different from mine. The only thing I'm sure of is that I never want to be parted from you," Jake interrupted gently. "The rest we can figure out together." The school term began with 28 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. Nora threw herself into teaching with characteristic dedication, but her students quickly noticed the tall cowboy who often appeared at the schoolhouse door at day's end to escort their teacher home. Jake had indeed spoken to the school board, and while they were initially skeptical, his position as the Triple R's new foreman and his straightforward manner had impressed them. Mr. Holbrook had grudgingly given his blessing to their courtship, with the understanding that it would be conducted with the utmost propriety. As autumn painted the desert with subtle changes, Jake and Nora's relationship deepened. They discovered shared values despite their different backgrounds: a love of learning, a strong sense of justice, and dreams of building something lasting in this wild frontier. In November, a letter arrived for Jake from Texas. Nora was with him when he opened it, sitting on Mrs. Henderson's front porch swing after Sunday dinner. "It's from my father's lawyer," Jake explained, his expression growing increasingly troubled as he read. "The man who bought our ranch after my parents died has abandoned the property. The bank is offering to sell it back to me at a fair price." "That's wonderful news, isn't it?" Nora asked, noting his frown. Jake folded the letter carefully. "It would have been once. That land was in my family for 3 generations. But now my future is here," he said simply, taking her hand. "With you, if you'll have me." 2 weeks later, on a crisp December evening, Jake proposed properly down on one knee in the schoolyard after all the children had gone home. The ring was a simple gold band with a small pearl, but to Nora, it was more beautiful than any diamond. "I promised you'd never struggle alone again," Jake reminded her as he slipped it onto her finger. "I intend to keep that promise for the rest of our lives." They were married on Christmas Day 1879 in Tombstone's newly completed church, with Mrs. Henderson beaming in the front pew and Jake's fellow ranch hands filling the back rows. Mr. Russell, impressed with Jake's work, offered them use of a small house on the ranch property close enough for Nora to continue teaching in town while giving them privacy to begin their life together. Their wedding night was a revelation for both of them, tender, passionate, and filled with discoveries that left them breathless. As they lay tangled together in the quiet darkness, Nora traced the scar on Jake's shoulder, a relic from a cattle drive gone wrong years before. "I never thought I could be this happy," she confessed, her voice soft in the darkness. "When my wagon got stuck in that mud, I was certain I'd made a terrible mistake coming west." Jake gathered her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Sometimes the worst moments lead us to the best ones," he murmured. "Getting stuck in the mud brought you to me." "Or you to me," Nora corrected with a smile, tilting her face up for a proper kiss. Spring brought changes to Tombstone and to the young couple. The town continued to grow as more silver was discovered, bringing an influx of new families and, consequently, more students for Nora's school. Jake's position at the Triple R expanded as Mr. Russell purchased adjacent land, nearly doubling the size of the operation. In April, as wildflowers once again dotted the desert, Nora shared news that brought tears of joy to Jake's eyes. They were expecting a child, due to arrive before Christmas. "A Christmas baby," Jake marveled, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Just like our wedding." The pregnancy didn't slow Nora down much, at least initially. She continued teaching through the spring term and made plans to train an assistant who could take over during her confinement and help with the growing number of students thereafter. Jake proved to be an attentive husband, insisting on taking over more household chores as Nora's pregnancy progressed and surprising her with small comforts: a rocking chair for the porch, shelves for her growing collection of books, a cradle he carved himself during the long summer evenings. In October 1880, nearly a year after their wedding, Nora stood on their porch watching a wagon approach through a cloud of dust. Jake had been in town picking up supplies and wasn't expected back for hours yet. As the wagon drew closer, Nora recognized Jake at the reins, but he wasn't alone. A small figure sat beside him, a girl of about 10 with dark braids and a wary expression. "Nora," Jake called as he pulled the wagon to a stop. "This is Sarah. She's going to be staying with us for a while." The story emerged gradually over supper. Sarah's parents had been passengers on the stagecoach arriving from Tucson. Her father had succumbed to tuberculosis during the journey, and her mother, overcome by grief and the hardship of the trail, had followed him within hours of reaching Tombstone. With no known relatives and the town's only boarding house full, the child faced being sent to an orphanage in Tucson. "I couldn't let that happen," Jake explained quietly while Sarah slept in their spare room. "Not when we have space here, and you being a teacher and all." Nora reached across the table to take his hand. "You did exactly right," she assured him. "That poor child has lost everything. We can give her a home, at least until more permanent arrangements can be made." But as days turned to weeks, it became clear that Sarah belonged with them. She blossomed under Nora's gentle guidance and Jake's patient kindness, gradually shedding her shell of grief to reveal a bright, curious child with a quick mind and a talent for drawing. By the time Nora went into labor in early December, Sarah had become an integral part of their family, eagerly helping prepare for the baby and proudly telling anyone who would listen that she was about to become a big sister. Their son, William Jacob Mercer, arrived on December 10, 1880, with a healthy pair of lungs and a shock of dark hair like his father's. Jake, who had paced outside the bedroom during the long hours of Nora's labor, broke down in tears when the midwife finally placed the swaddled infant in his arms. "He's perfect," Jake whispered, carefully sitting on the edge of the bed where an exhausted but radiant Nora lay. "Just like his mother." Sarah, allowed in to meet her new brother, approached the bed with solemn wonder. "He's so tiny," she marveled. "Can I touch him?" "Of course you can, sweetheart," Nora assured her. "You're his sister now." As Sarah gently stroked the baby's cheek with one finger, Jake met Nora's eyes over the children's heads. The love that passed between them needed no words. It was as vast as the desert that had brought them together and as enduring as the mountains that watched over their home. That night, with little William asleep in his cradle and Sarah tucked into her bed, Jake pulled Nora close beneath the quilts. "Did you ever imagine this would be your life?" he asked softly. "When you set out from St. Louis?" Nora thought about the frightened, determined young woman she had been, setting out alone into the unknown with nothing but hope and courage to sustain her. "No," she admitted. "This is far better than anything I could have imagined." "Even though your wagon got stuck in the mud?" Jake teased gently. Nora smiled in the darkness, remembering that fateful day. "Especially because my wagon got stuck in the mud," she replied, turning to kiss him. "It led me to you, and you led me home." Outside their window, the desert stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars, witness to their journey from strangers to family, a journey that began with a stuck wagon, a helping hand, and a promise kept.